All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for taking time to join in the conversation. All right, we are recording now.
Gotcha.
The little voice told me. Okay, so I'll read you this statement just to give a vibe, and then we can just go into the questions.
How did my thoughts develop over time?
Yeah.
I think they grew, and I thought there was so much to say. Like I thought about capitalism, I thought about colonization, about what do we want to learn and who do we want to learn from? And yeah, I got really big, and then I was like, this is too much for 2 pages. Then I thought, where do I where can I start? And thinking about your prompts, and how do I even imagine a different future? And yeah, I went back to some of my work, and also when I'm teaching, I live up to teach quill work as well. And sometimes people don't know how to thread a needle, which is something I learned as a child, and I thought was a very common thing to learn as a young person. When it turns out it's not. And so yeah, in my mind, I was conceptually thinking really large about all of these things, and then practically remembering this experience of needing to understand that my starting point isn't other people's starting points, and that sometimes threading a needle is really the hardest part, because it's one of the finest motor skills in a lot of tasks. So it can be really hard. I know a lot of people shared with me that they know how to thread a needle because they did it for their grandparents once their eyesight, weekends, I guess. It seems like a strange word, but I guess if they don't have as good eyesight, then they get the younger ones to thread the needle. So I think there's that connection to the different skills we develop over, and the different skills we have over our ages. So I ended up drawing diagrams of how I thread a needle, and what my tips are for how to thread a needle.
The dimension of this project is what kinds of thinking happens in artistic practices that maybe isn't possible in other, conventional academic, hegemonic ways of disseminating thinking to the world. So I'd love to hear how your thoughts developed over time. Were there changes, or was there more of a this is really the first thought is the best thought kind of attitude?
It definitely was one of these where, at least for me, the initial thought was the best, essentially, which was to kind of create a moment addressing administrators within any kind of institution that wants to kind of take the task or gets the zine, right? And at that point, trying to create a moment that kind of blends a bit of kind of, I guess, more didactic approaches, data collection with something a bit more, I guess, artistic, you could say, creative, something that brings that administrator or that kind of person who's maybe indoors all day, kind of in a much more I guess less creative position in a creative institution into that space. So asking them to kind of do a kind of artistic exercise. And that was like my initial approach. But then I was like, what is it? Okay, great. Like and this is, I don't know if this resonates with anyone else, but this tends to be a problem for me. I tend to think kind of big picture. I'm like, okay, I got the frame, but like what's in it? And to get to what's in it, I kind of went back to, I guess, a bit of a manifesto approach. And that's something that I wrote as a letter from the Department of Reflection, and the letter is to you. But essentially it's to kind of this greater idea. And the question is, how can there be more art in arts education, and what does that even mean? And it kind of goes into how there can be more failure. There can be kind of more, I guess, outcomes that are kind of unforeseen, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to be in the zine. And then that kind of led me to kind of the creation of the content of this exercise, which will be obtained through a QR code that someone can kind of get to a form and kind of fill it out and then send it to both of us, essentially.
I am contributing an augmented reality game, basically like a little board game that you can scan with your phone, and then that accesses an app that provides an interactive overlay for the game. So you do have to you can't just play it with the print, but then once you download the game, making it, then you can choose how many people you want to play with. You'd still have to be in the same space as one another, but it's a turn-based snakes and ladders sort of inspired game where you roll the dice and you choose a direction in which you want to go, and then you get opportunities to climb the ladders or slide down the snakes with the pitfalls. But really, then the interaction and the intention of the piece is to look at the ways in which we are learning in all sorts of different kinds of interactions with art communities, or even just creative communities, or even just like random people that you might meet and talk to, or I don't know, take an improv class or do like a cosplay with. How this can all contribute to different ways of learning about art and artistic practice, and experiencing that together or by yourself if you choose to play the game alone. And then thinking about how that contributes to education beyond the standard format of a BFA or an MFA program, although those are also options you can take in the game.
I would say I was also similar, like my kind of like first concrete thought is what I was really able to run with, because I use so heavily like my own experience in like, okay, well, how did I get to where I've come? And also like how have I worked with other people who may be coming up behind me, and like what kind of lessons and messages can I like actually like process in a way that people can pick up and like use and manipulate in their own way. But thinking about that also had me thinking about like what you asked initially, like how does this field allow you to really I want to say like move? And I think about that a lot when I think about like bringing sometimes kind of weird conceptual things into like physical form. I've been thinking a lot about like Fred Moten and his I'll just say theory maybe on like Black sonic anarchy. And I don't know if any of you have read Fred Moten, but it's dense, and I feel like I don't know words often when I'm reading his work. But like when I think about that, like this is such a like highly conceptual thing that like honestly many people will understand very easily, and it's something that's inherent for a lot of folks. And it's, I think, working in the arts and like working curatorially specifically, for me, you're able to bend concepts into the space that they are allowed, if that makes sense. So you can take like this idea of sonic anarchy and place it into a performance, like maybe some experimental performance where you're just pairing these very traditional and experimental dancers who are taking like Black traditional American like forms of music and movement and pairing them together, and like you're handing the audience sonic anarchy, but it's in a way that makes so much more sense to everybody and makes more sense to like speak about and feel and understand. And I think that's something that the arts allows for. It's such an expansive way of teaching and learning and experiencing, whether you're like in the public or not. And so I use that like idea pretty heavily because like I understand, or began to understand during this, that a lot of the work that like we do, there's a heavy background to it. And so we're already kind of processing these ideas and these theories or whatever they might be into action, however it might look, pretty much. Yeah.
You've spoken a little bit about what these circles represent to you, what the sort of car and the Newport, like these moments from your life, and it's a way of creating a record.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about maybe some of your color choices and these the dot patterns. Like to me, like I go straight to Braille, but I actually don't know if that's what those things represent for you.
Yeah, it's actually a part of the Cooper building.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the, what would that be? The northeast staircase or northwest staircase of the Tim Main new academic building.
Okay.
The studios were on that floor, so a point of decompression when I was having a very intense sort of psychosis and things, I would go into the staircase and kind of just sit and try to breathe and be less immersed as it was. It was one of those moments where I was feeling that like cognitive decline of having this very repetitious and aggravating illness happening, and I wanted to sit down and focus. So I tried to just draw the staircase. I don't know if you can see it, but there are slats in between those structures, and you'll see vertical lines and some horizontal lines. That's all the structure of that space.
Okay.
It
Wow.
was drawn in 2-point perspective, technically as sound as I can make it. So each point is color coded for a certain depth, and the point was to kind of like project back into like a skill space that I was familiar with, and also thinking about spatial sort of recognition and how that's relating to, you know, things like friends and family, being away from home or whatever. So it's very emotional, but at the time I couldn't afford, you know, burst of emotion and things. It was a little too volatile, so I needed things to be a little lukewarm. So the color palette, just to spring into that, it really has a lot to do with this lukewarm aesthetic that I try to make, or not lukewarm, but like room temperature sort of aesthetic that I really love, because a lot of my work sometimes very punchy or very intense, or very structural or very bold, but to make a cool sort of warm, like room temperature feeling to this space. All these elements there are just from different series, different points in my life, different ephemera from different times that are just like active players in this kind of stage for like an axiology poem. It's just essentially talking about the absurdness of like having these materials used for shelter bodies and clothing and things be the note of a $20 bill, $10 bill, $1 bill, whatever. and still have different values than the actual superfluous value kind of ascribed to it. And thinking about all of this angst that I have with my axiological struggles with philosophy, with life, and thinking how much I'm really spending on cigarettes, which is very like a dry punchline in life. And I've spent too much money on cigarettes. It's like 7,200 cigarettes a year that I probably smoke. That's
Wow.
not good for me. Like, why am I doing this? This is being so concerned with axiology. I'm not like valuing my health enough, and it just plays off of that, and that gets into some of that. But it came easy to do the work quickly because I kind of had those ephemeral elements to move together. I think the thought was there, and in that way I was already thinking in a vein closer to maybe what the prompt could have been interpreted as for me.
Okay.
It just came easily thinking about how I think about things. So.
No, I'm happy to hear that. I think it was sort of an impossible prompt, and one person in particular said this feels like homework to me, and I was like, okay, that wasn't the goal. I understand, but I'm glad you you took the route of like, what does it feel like to me, and how can my practice meet this prompt, like in a way that I don't feel like I'm being forced to do something that doesn't come naturally.
Yes. So I've been working primarily for the last 3 years under the Department of Reflection, though not exclusively. The Department of Reflection has, in many ways, afforded me the ability to kind of be malleable and collaborative and cross-disciplinary in ways that kind of going by your own moniker doesn't allow me. The Department of Reflection was started when I began a residency with the City of Miami Beach, and specifically their Department of Environment and Sustainability. That began in the summer of 2018. Before I decided to kind of respond with the Department of Reflection, I started doing some kind of ground research, literally, and kind of starting with like the geology of Miami and moving forward from there. And once I kind of addressed that, I felt that I could kind of tackle the kind of now and looking at not only, I guess, especially public space, but also public space in regards to the systems that are behind that space. I looked at local government specifically as a kind of malleable form or system that I could address, and felt that the Department of Reflection was what I think many, not just Miami Beach, but many local governments need, not only a kind of foil or a reflection of, so that they can kind of think about what they're doing and kind of feel that kind of uncanny representation in an artwork, but also spaces and moments for reflections. That's kind of the dual thing that the project provides. Now with this project, I've been kind of applying that model of dual reflection to other kinds of institutions. I'm eager to see where this train of thought goes, this being the first time that at least this project is addressing contemporary arts education.
It'll be a tough follow, but I think I can try. So yeah, I work as an independent curator and arts programmer with a heavy focus on like community engagement and whatever kind of iteration or rather like manifestation that comes into. So I really started understanding the arts professionally probably about 10 years ago when I started moving away from just understanding the artistic side of visual and performance arts into like the curatorial and programmatic side of it. And I like to say that I was really lucky at not going to get my master's degree and being able to curate before I even went to college, because I never had to unlearn the idea of a white box is where art should be. But even in that, there was still a lot that I needed to unlearn as I like progressed in what would become my practice. So really early on, before I understood what I was really doing, it was mostly me putting on shows for my friends who just didn't have anywhere else to display work. And so like, even to this day, my community is still heavily Black, Indigenous, and queer artists, because that is the community I come from. That's where I began this kind of like journey into curating as care and as like community building, I'll say. But when I was in Chicago, I really started to understand the importance of working within your community, the nuances of your community as you're building artwork that is artwork and art spaces and art programming that's accessible and doesn't have barriers that need to be climbed over or broken down, and just working directly with artists and really having an actual artist-centered art world, which makes the most sense, but is not really practiced heavily. So as I work, I tend to be in a lot of collectives with other with artists, other curators, other programmers, to really understand what a community needs in different aspects. And I was in multiple collectives just in the city of Chicago, and all of those came with different needs from the community, different wants, different resources, things of that nature. So as I just moved through my practice in general, I really try to make sure that I'm being in tune as much as I possibly can be with as many aspects of developing of exhibition and programmatic work. Yeah, I work heavily with emerging underrepresented artists who are doing work that is not traditionally seen from like the lens of Black and brown artists making this. So a lot of performance, a lot of experimental sound, film, photography that's subverting many gazes, things of that nature. And I really work to make my exhibitions and programming something that's heavily experiential, so people never feel like they have to come in with a set understanding of what does experimental film look like. You don't need to know to experience it and like really have it move you. And that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about my work, I do have a background in performance art, in some level of curating, but definitely since moving to London in 2019, and then thanks to the pandemic, my practice has mostly been writing based, which is kind of where I come from, starting with like very heavy interest in a lot of the writing practices of the late 19th, early 20th century, kind of peaking for me with like Dada, and then going into like J.G. Ballard, Kathy Acker, the new narrative people coming out of San Francisco. And yeah, just being very interested in the sense of history and language and this interaction of these historic forces that are both over us and creating us, but also require us to create them, our helplessness in this interaction, and trying to kind of capture that at one point in a performance practice, but now much more in a writing practice. And of course, there being very interested in the way that language forms us, forms our identity very directly and involuntarily, but at the same time requires us to continue existing.
Hey everybody, thanks for including me in this. And I'm really wondering what I'm about to say because I'm not sure yet. But I guess you know, I'm from a small town outside of a small city in Ontario, and I think I'm still kind of in awe that I get to play some sort of role in the art community and the art world. I certainly never wanted to become an educator. I come from a family of educators, so the last thing I was ever going to do was become a teacher. But I ended up at a wonderful place and have been able to co-create a program that changes constantly, sometimes daily, to hopefully meet the needs of everyone involved, both current students and to some degree graduates as well. And we are working really hard to give people opportunities that may not have had opportunities otherwise. So some of the recent examples of that are helping people pay for university entirely. We believe in, exhibiting heavily. There are years when we're doing 120, 130 exhibitions. And I guess just based on my own experience coming from outside of the art world, it's been really important to me to create and offer as many opportunities as possible so that people can practice and experience the highs and lows of being in this place and doing these things. I believe strongly that young people can contribute just as much as some of our older artist friends. And so we've been showing at museums internationally for more than a decade now. Even during COVID, we showed in Germany and the US in museums, and just trying to integrate different levels of the art world together. So having people who are curating at Canadian museums or directors of Canadian contemporary art galleries work with the kids and vice versa. We have students showing at contemporary commercial art galleries and just trying to mix up and shake up the whole hierarchy of the whole thing, which is great. My own practice includes certainly, I think, the school itself. It's a creative act. A friend of mine, an artist friend of mine, said after an event one year, I guess this is your art practice now, which at first was a bit unsettling, but I did come to realize that he was probably telling the truth. But I also feel very passionately about collecting work from artists and participating that way and supporting. I make things as well and continue to exhibit and published artist editions and writing by students and former students. So anything I can do, I'm happy to participate in and involve as many people as possible. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. 你是选择 Vanessa， 你好，我被我普通话没有考，能在以了朋友la kait， shikne wiki on Toronto, any chic. I'm actually missing my Lenape language class right now, so I had to get a little practice in. What do? I try to learn a little bit of the Lenape language. When I first met Joshua, I think that was like one of the first things we like bonded over was those ideas that you spoke to in terms of how we're formed by language, and we also form language and the different ways that connects and alienates people. And what else do? I make quill work, which is an examples behind me. So it's a kind of embroidery method with porcupine quills. It has been done by Indigenous people across North America for hundreds or thousands of years. And in my earlier practice, I did a lot more sculpture and performance. And I still do those things, but I've spent about the past almost 5 years now really pouring myself into quill work. I think that it's something that I missed in my earlier art education, both within my family, my community, and my formal education, was an education based around the textile practices of my Indigenous nations. So yeah, since pursuing that and learning it, I've really gotten really enthralled with those textile practices, and I make connections to performance in terms of dyeing the quills and color theory, and what else? Yeah, because I'll just leave it there for now. That's fine. Thanks.
And yeah, so the projects that I work on are usually about the relationship, this idea of how work and play are overlap, how they're intersected within contemporary life, and how play, like the act of play, but also then those playful technologies, like games, like VR headsets, whatever, can be used to exploit or oppress workers. Or just people in their everyday life, or turn those people into workers. And then also when I'm working on art projects, then I'm also thinking about how to use play to create these projects. So whether that's through the relationship I have with like my other collaborators, like we're having a fun time because we're doing like goofy stuff in a new and novel medium, like VR chat or something, or because we're actually like creating projects through sort of spontaneous role playing or collaboration. I like to think about that I use play both as like a subject and then also as a as part of the practice, the creative practice.
These themes of work and play, I was kind of like, I see this line could be a triangle, like learning, education does fit in there somewhere. And I wondered like, how would that like be a broom in the system of your practice, or how would you respond?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was just sort of remembering, I mean, that we had a couple of, because we were doing this online and it was asynchronous, there was some sort of gaps in my thinking, and then I had to like revisit remembering the project as I like picked it up over and over again. But initially really thinking more about how could I look at this problem of student debt. So that was like, that's such a depressing and like big dark topic that is of course such a reality. And I think as I did know that I wanted to work with some sort of augmented reality print project. So there was an inkling at the beginning, simply because that was what I had been working on for a little while. And so I decided to think about then this idea of the alternatives, like making the alternatives, and how I could bring like a playful element into that and sort of a collaborative element into that, not only from also getting some programming help from my partner Jonathan, but then also just like for the audience, to turn it into a bit of a game and to think about their expectations of education. So that's where I ended up where I am. It's more focused on imagining how existing models of learning in the art world could potentially become more or a way in which we consider an art education like evolving, like basically like let's play a game that takes a bunch of different scenarios, and then that becomes your character's path in order for them to become an artist or feel that they've had an arts education.
What I appreciate about this is, yeah, there's intimidation. That's a part of, I think that's something everyone spoke about, but you're sort of determined to bring the sensibility that was present in a lot of your other work, which is this playfulness and this like, okay, it's a dark subject, but like I have my method, and like, how can I merge that? How can I explore that subject with the tools I've been developing in my practice over time? Which for me was another major theme of this project. The conversation of student debt is so reliant on narratives that are like a national scale, which is immediately alienating. They're very reliant on statistics. They're very reliant on sort of graphs and all these, like the visual culture is very impersonal and dehumanizing, which I think creates a sort of sense that it's not something an individual can think about or approach. And I love, yeah, turning it into this game, something that people have. I feel like I can experience the thoughts like through this like visual medium, and that's something across the board that I like was hoping for. So I think it's very cool.
There was something you were saying, I think it was in your letter of intent that we viewed at the start of the project, and it was kind of used the word afterlives and community sort of networks of like artist interaction. And I thought a lot about like how community is built in terms of like a social sphere or in like a career field where you're in art, and you may not know how to get yourself started, but like it takes community to really get out there. Like reticence will work against you in a lot of ways. So I was thinking about that kind of heavy, that like community is always to the benefit of the person who's experiencing it, and that really caught my attention.
That was my hope for this kind of event. Like I wanted folks who'd contributed to the project to actually like meet, because I think that's always part of like participating in exhibitions and zines and stuff that I enjoy, is like meeting fellow, you know, thinkers and creators and stuff, and seeing what can, if that can like be generative in any way. But you know, things haven't shaken out like that exactly.
I think I had like a similar experience when I first, when you first reached out, except that at that point, I hadn't been in school for a while. So I was like, what do I even have to say about this? What can I even like contribute that's useful? And as I started to think about it more, and like we talked a little bit, I realized that I was really going in a direction of, okay, what does it look like? What does it mean for like students to have to come out of school, especially when they're in like more curatorial studies, art history tracks, where you have to unlearn so much and then pretty much relearn multiple new canons on your own, and the many connections between them. So I was thinking about just like the maybe the failures of the traditional academic structure in comparison to how I've found myself like thriving in a more like community knowledge, community-based learning environment. So I really, I don't want to go into like how much I shifted quite yet, because I know it's like a further question, but I really started on that, like, okay, like what does it look like to learn completely outside of this academic structure, to like be able to be on the ground as you're learning and using that as like teaching as well. And I started to look at it also as like a thing that has really been incredibly important in my life, both like professionally and personally. And like I feel like is sometimes kind of lost in the art world now, but that like the relationships of apprenticeship and mentorship. So I kind of went heavily into that route is when I started to think about like, okay, what do I want to actually contribute that could be something that people can use and learn from.
You're looking very studious, taking notes.
And drawing pictures.
Cool. It's a form of note taking.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's a form of note taking. It helps me focus. And yeah, I think I've been leaning more into the visual note taking lately. Yeah, definitely. I think it also relates to when I started thinking about this project, I was really happy to receive the invitation, and so happy to be here with like thinking about this with all of you. Some of my initial thoughts was when well, first I pursued an undergraduate degree because my mom told me I should, I guess, and because I wanted to, and having having a learning disability and in like elementary and high school, being in like remedial classes, I was always kind of like hesitant about what kind of formal education things I could achieve. And I guess in like classic disability style, it was really like a matter of like hacking kind of some systems and working things out. And I was lucky enough to be really well supported by my family. So I thought about that. I wanted to learn more. So I thought about doing an MFA, and I didn't think that there was an institution out there that would meet my goals and expectations. So I thought about what if I took, I don't know, like $50,000, or like I kind of priced out what school would cost. And I was like, what if I put that into my own learning? And I paid for a studio, and I reached out to artists I know and did studio visits with them, and kind of put together my own graduate school, so to speak. And I think that would have been a great idea, and I would have learned a lot. But ultimately, I was like, well, I don't think there's any funding available for that. And then I won't have any credentials, and that really worried me. So in starting this, that was the first thing I thought about.
That's really interesting, actually. And I do completely identify with you. I also have a learning disability that caused me a lot of grief as a young kid up until probably high school, when I think, like you say, the arts provided you an environment to hack the system or do things the way you needed to do them, which is what I think going to an arts high school did for me. And that's how it was my way of clinging to an institution in a way, because it wasn't going to happen for me otherwise. So I'm really interested to hear that, like, that's a shared experience.
I feel like even the representation of like being in a sphere with someone else, or a sphere with those community members, even though you're further apart or worlds apart, or just wherever you are, it can kind of like become like a conjoined effort, just off the basis of like letting that same index from somebody else's art like influence you in some way. There's more of like an ethereal way of looking at it, kind of like community building through like impression, as well as like a nascency of like, oh, we've worked together on the same project. Maybe one day we all can focus in on ideas and share ideas.
Okay, what did I make? I'm realizing I feel like mine sounds so bland next to everybody else's, but like I'm realizing I made it really for people that are already pretty out of the academic realm, like actively, but like working, just like working within community. Because like the questions I asked and just like the statements I made, I think they're really driving people to look at who's around them, and also look at themselves and like what they can bring to the forefront, how they can assist, how they can support, how they can find support, things like that. So I think it's pretty well, I can't really say straightforward in that sense, but I think it's pretty kind of take what you need of just like my thoughts and things that have helped myself deeply, and I hope can help others in any kind of capacity, however they need to like shift it and change it for themselves. One thing that it is helping me do is kind of like get back to just like relationships in the arts that don't have exchange necessarily. Well, it could be like, exchange of information, of energy, of like resources, but like not of like, I'm around this person to be able to get into this gallery or something. I want it to be rather like, I'm around this person who I want to genuinely grow with. And while we're growing together, we're learning and building each other, and like our networks are building and our skill sets are building, things like that. I think that's really important. And what I want to see in the art world, as much as the art world exhausts me, I really think that I really kind of tapped into what does your community look like? Not like the 3,000 people that maybe go into a gallery on a Thursday night, but what are like the 50 people that are on your block, and maybe see the exact same shows over and over again. What are they doing, and like how can you come together to like really create something or dismantle something, whatever it needs to be, honestly. I think that's what I'm starting to take away from it, but also I think it's still growing and moving in my head. Yeah.
Josh, I'm not sure if you're at an advantage or disadvantage in that you came to this much, much later than everybody else. You saved me when someone else couldn't be involved anymore. So yeah, hearing people thinking back it was so long ago when I kind of first reached out and was asked, would you be interested in participating and going on that journey mentally? I don't know, it can be a bit boring. It can be a bit of a struggle. How do you feel like 2 weeks in?
Yeah, I think in one way, maybe that's an advantage for me anyway, because I think I tend to overthink and over theorize things. On that note, the first thing that I started thinking of was Mark Fisher's capitalist realism. And is there a way out or around or through? And then I know that the title is a reference to Margaret Thatcher and her proclamation that there is no alternative. So at the same time, wanting to resist that. And my first reaction is to want to kind of balance the necessary cynicism. Like, if you're not cynical about this stuff, you won't get anywhere, because like they've got a huge head start on constraining, restraining, building this whole thing. But having a balanced and thoughtful cynicism. And then the other thing that I guess I was thinking of with the prompt is that it might not actually be possible to imagine our way out of it, that it does require actually doing it and building it. And kind of like Jamila was saying, like, you can't intellectualize your way out of this. We have to like do it block by block and like really put in the work in order to figure out if there is an alternative, which is the same way that like the system that we have has come together as far as like debt and education. It's been cobbled together. It seems very deliberate because it's so cruel and impressive, but it was an accident and it didn't have to be this way. And I think keeping that in mind is another way to kind of like balance out the necessary cynicism. So that's kind of where I came into this over intellectualizing everything.
Yeah, for me, it comes from a complex of like being at the Cooper Union, where at the time I was grandfathered into the full tuition model, and I didn't really have as many debts, but understood like the complications of like debt, because I still had debt. I still had to get FAFSA and things. So though I have like maybe $150,000 less, I still have like
Yeah, of course.
a significant amount of debt, which is any debt is kind of oppressive to some extent. So when I was thinking about that, I thought like it's very difficult, and I don't want to like put myself in the place of, you know, being so value stricken, but I think a lot in terms of axiology and just value theory, and it becomes this crushing sort of moment where in a university you feel like you're starting into something that's going to work for you. For me, I was just diagnosed with mental illness when I started after the first year, and it was increasingly terrible for the first 2 years, and I lost a lot of skills and things. And
Wow.
I think about it almost in a term of angst. Like there's like a absurdness to like the crapshoot of, you know, wanting to pursue your passion while being constantly torn down mentally and emotionally in that space.
Wow.
And so when I think about the axiology of it, it was immediately like tied to some of the things that I think are also just very absurd concepts, like money itself, which is angsty, and there are all purposes. There's purposes for money, and it's a tool. But the linen and cotton reference, it brings it to like a very personal space. Being a Black person in a predominantly white institution where money is made from the same staple crops that like my family was, or family of a distant past were like slaved for and murdered for. And the simple fact that a 1 could be like the same thing as a 10, same material, same conceptual nature, same thing, but the absurdity of having like a value system that's based on a material that could be a utilitarian purpose that becomes a note for debts. And with that, I just kind of thought back to the year that I made the projective sort of drawing that's in the background there. And thinking about that, around that time, I was having just a hard time with valuing myself as an artist, valuing my life at times, just being mentally ill.
Yeah.
And knowing that those skills that I was gaining were the sense of self-worth that I had left, that I wanted to really conjure up and begin with again. So it's heavily axiological, very value driven, and I tend to be kind of a value driven person. So
Okay.
I think a lot about knowing myself in terms of like how I value things beyond like a tool or some sort of like sublimation of a tool or fetishism of a tool.
Yeah. So yeah, I took the zine page pretty literally and contributed a piece of writing that I think is thoughtful and maybe a little experimental in form, if nothing else. And then, yeah, I hope that it does that it continues to do the thinking that I was doing, which is trying to interrogate like, why are things the way they are? Like, how deliberate was it? And then what do we want? What do we actually want out of it? There's, of course, a lot of very complicated reasons why I went into debt to go to school. And how do we preserve that and continue to make that possible in ways that don't require debt? Is that possible? And hopefully getting like more thinking around that, and realizing that it could be possible that it isn't, that the failure of the current system to care for us and our needs isn't necessary.
Well, I hope they have enough patience to go through all the steps of like downloading an app. Thank you if you do.
I'm gonna.
Yeah. And I feel like they've contributed their patience to new media practices. Thank you. But hopefully then more specifically, this project, in the way that it's laid out, I think you can see this, but that the idea that art practices and art education aren't necessarily linear things with like a goal. So you move around the board in different ways, and you have opportunities in which you can move around the board with like how you roll, but then also you'll fall prey to like the snakes and the ladders sort of mechanics. So some things like rent eviction usually just has a one type of outcome. So hopefully people think about the ways in which certain goals are like highlighted as must-haves, but then there's all these other ways in which you can approach that goal of being an artist, or developing your education, your art practice to reach that goal, and also maybe to think about how it's more fun to play with friends, because that is an option that you have with the game, and then that I think is something that I've at least learned through my own practice in collaborating with others.
Yeah, as far as how what I was doing is developed, I'm not sure it's had quite enough time to do it as some of these other ones, but it definitely has done, or I hope it has, kind of like what Camille was talking about, like, yeah, thinking about the undercommons and Fred Moten and that interaction there. The experience of reading something and feeling like you're reading alongside somebody is something that I hope that the piece that I'm contributing does. So maybe it will continue to develop over time, just like if it's loose enough and yeah, free enough in the way that thinking and writing in the arts can be, that it feels like some other kinds of writing and thinking resist. The arts definitely encourages and allows to flourish.
Yeah, I guess I know from working with so many people at the school, I'm in that place in this project where I have to do some research, and that would be the next step. And it'd be a fascinating thing to engage in, like what are people really expecting from their school experience in terms of moving towards being an artist or professional artist or however they want to frame it. And I don't have any of the data, and it sort of just left me realizing how much I could learn from going through a process of speaking to people, interviewing people, and gathering that information. I'm sure lots of people have done it. It probably exists, but it would be a super exciting next step now to actually try to understand what people were hoping for and what they believed was true and what they learned is actually true through this process. I know that the system in place is working as well as it's working, which for some people is amazingly well. And lots of people get left out, lots of people can't afford it.
I encourage you to pursue that because I think you'd actually be surprised how little interviewing of current or recent grads of like this crop of art schools or universities in general there actually is. At one point while I was doing research for this project, because it did grow out of like a graduate degree, so I had to sort of produce a lot of written, like, here's why this is a valid subject, et cetera, et cetera. Mostly it's stuff from like the late 90s, and it's from professors who are like, here's what we think art education really ought to be. And they have, you know, the resources and wherewithal to put these publications together and get them published. Whereas I think maybe in the mainstream, recent grads of art schools haven't been able to break through like that yet. Like, I'm sure there's other zines out there, but I think there's definitely room for these more like interview-based, like data-driven approaches to like what is going on like on the ground in schools right now. So yeah, do it, please.
No, yeah, maybe we will. I mean, I don't know if we realize this when you're at ESA, but we switched from running an art school to helping people be artists rather than students. And then we realized that most high schools that I was aware of and most post-secondary programs that I was aware of teach people to be students. And then they're left on their own to figure out how to be an artist. So there's fundamental shifts like that, which would be great to share.
Okay. Is this the last two things that I thought about? They're really just shout outs. One is to an article written by an artist named Raven Davis. Raven wrote an article titled "My Mother Gave Me My Indigenous MFA," and it's about institutional barriers. And the other one is Peter Morin has given a lecture a couple times, and it's titled "Falling in Love with Art School Dropouts." And it's about people who have dropped out of art school and the different reasons and why. Yes, those are just two of my final thoughts.
Were there any artworks or essays or just pieces of media in general that you feel were important to you when making this, or were just in the back of your head, whether they like informed you directly or not?
That is a good question. I was thinking about recently, I had just finished reading this book about well, it was about One Direction, really. Let me drop it in the chat. What is this title? Fangirl.
Yeah, is it like Fandom is Method or something?
It was You Have Everything I Need book. Fangirl. This will be cut from the, yeah, here it is. How Fangirls Created the Internet as We Know it. Let me get this copied and pasted for you. So I was working on this project for Black Flash that was also really overlapped with this project, in the sense that it was about digital art education. They asked 10 artists, like, when did you start defining yourself as a digital artist? Basically, how did you end up here today? And I'd gotten this book from Drawn and Quarterly because it was like so beautiful and so appealing on its cover. Even though I had no idea about, and I didn't know anything about One Direction really. And I was really curious about it from my own experience as a fangirl who for anime.
Ah,
So yes,
cool.
cosplay definitely inspired my artistic practice. Group cosplay, big group cosplay. So it was, while this like book was talking about a very specific like fandom, obviously, that had a particular practice that they established, I was thinking about how basically thinking back to a lot of my old previous work online on like different forums, and specifically post-based role play, where it's like turn by turn, people like do different like input to like, either it's like text or an image that they draw, and then they like build off collaborative like stories or comics with it. So I got really into like this one website called Tagakie. This is pretty much a tangent, but it's I got really into this one website, and I realized, like, looking back at this, because I was super invested in these role play groups where we were like using other fandoms, but then creating like massive alternative universes based within them. But yeah, so got really invested in that, and then realized like years and years later, especially when the website went offline, like how much that experience meant to me, and how really that was like my first large-scale collaborative art project. Because not only did I have to work with like a bunch of other people in both like as an artist and also as like a curator / like moderator in these roles, but then I also had to like work with all the pitfalls of like working with other, work your own creative vision versus other people's creative vision. Sometimes I just wanted to have a laugh, and sometimes that was not or sometimes I wanted to be serious, and other people are coming at it from all different angles. So I was reading this book, and I thought it was super interesting, just because it talked about like this creative path, and these creative practices that like these total like normal people, I guess, with not necessarily like they were obviously super fans, but like how, to the extent of how many like One Direction fans existed, and then like how many One Direction's fans did end up participating in kind of these various niche like content creation groups. I found it like very I found it a really interesting book. Yeah. even though I couldn't relate to it at all, because why on earth would you care about real people in the real world? I am all about the cool anime characters, so
No, I feel you. And I mean, I think I'm not as strong as I used to be, but yeah, I was a major in the anime fan world when I was in high school. Was like I learned more in like 20 minutes browsing after school than I did like 7 hours all day. Just like the critical discourse going on was so cool.
Yes, so you can become like so involved and invested in that community. And I think fan communities and like basically the arts community is just like one specific type of fandom.
Yeah.
So, and then it breaks down into many different types of fandom beyond that, like contemporary art, or perhaps you are, I don't know, like, yeah, specific new media art interest, such as me. So yeah, that was the book. That was the thing. I wasn't actually reading anything to do with student debt. It was totally about fangirls.
No, and I think that's part of this. I'm maybe not reading hard facts about the student debt crisis every day, and I'll read adjacent stuff like David Graeber, on debt, the social world of debt. But yeah, mostly it's a thing looming in my life, along with like whatever I happen to be like browsing through at the time. Maybe I'm watching like Angel's Egg, but debt is still there, and it's like merging with that like cinematic oeuvre or whatever. Like I think that's, I don't know, a reality of artistic life as well. Like you're not trying to concentrate all your media, but you do understand how they work together. Yeah, the expanded social world of fandom and how it can provide a model to think about contemporary art and people who choose to be fans of that life. Really appreciate that. Your point about the subject being so big and the actual like exhibition space, so to speak, being so small. Yeah, that's something that I somehow didn't hit me until like everything was already done. And I was like, I really screwed these people. Like I really just asked them to solve an impossible problem on one sheet of printer paper. And I'm expecting people not to be like irritated, or I'm expecting responses, which I got, which I'm like stunned by actually every day that I like go back to work on the project. So like, I don't know what I learned exactly. Something about what you ask people to deal with versus how much space. Like as a curator, I'm going to take that forward with me. I didn't give you very much physical space to deal with a very complicated problem, but I still got a lot of amazing work. So yeah, did I learn my lesson or not? I'm not sure. We're going to see. I might torture the next group of people I work with the same way, because it's everything I got was amazing.
Well,
okay.
I actually took it as a tactic though, because I felt that a zine is so intimate, right? It can be very unassuming. It can be something that you just kind of like throw in the back of your car and then pick up, you know, on your way to the beach or something. And so I felt like it was a kind of hack. It was like a way to kind of get people to take this to heart in a way, you know. So I don't know. That's how I took it. And then, you know, it's having that confined space also kind of creates a moment where you have to, you have to like Vanessa said, like I think we all kind of had this moment, and then you just have to like fit it in there, and so something's gonna, you know, kind of get to the surface. So I thought it felt very deliberate to me.